The sky was dimming as it settled behind the distant ridges, casting long shadows over the dry landscape. Liam, a solitary farmer living on the outskirts of the outer territories of a distant colony, trudged back toward his modest cottage. The earthy scent of the fields mixed with the lingering odor of harvested wheat in the air. His farm was only halfway through the harvest, and his muscles ached after a full day's labor. Wiping his forehead, he was ready to lock the gate to his land when he heard a faint tap, tap, tap. The knock was soft, tentative, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure whether they should knock too loudly. Liam froze. Few ever ventured this far out into the wilds of the colony. Slowly, he stepped toward the wooden gate, swinging it open. Standing there, half buried in the dust of the road, was a young alien woman. Her skin was an ashen gray, with faint, luminescent lines running down her neck. Her eyes glowed softly, like the last light of dusk. She wore a torn, ragged cloth draped over her shoulders, but what caught Liam's attention were the two small, frail children clinging to her legs. Their bodies were thin, their cheeks sunken, their eyes haunted and wide with fear. "Please, don't be afraid," the girl's voice trembled. "I don't want to steal. I'll work for food. Anything you need, cleaning, farming, digging. Just feed my children." Liam stood motionless for a moment, glancing between the girl and the two children. One of them barely seemed able to stand. His heart softened, and he stepped aside, pulling the gate wider. "Come in," he muttered. Inside his humble home, Liam lit a fire, placed a battered kettle on the stove, and watched as the children huddled together, shivering with cold. The girl sat near the entrance, her body tense, as if poised to flee at any moment. He served them a simple meal, just broth with soft vegetables. The children grabbed the bowls with trembling hands, devouring the food hungrily, as though they hadn't eaten in days. Liam set a second bowl in front of the girl. She didn't touch it. He raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you hungry?" She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll eat after I finish working." "You'll eat now," Liam insisted. Standing up, he handed her the spoon. "While it's hot." The girl hesitated for a long moment before finally taking the spoon from him. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that evening, after the children had fallen into a quiet, exhausted sleep, Liam offered them old blankets and a place by the fire. He gestured to a corner. "You can rest there. You're safe now." But the alien girl remained sitting, her eyes alert, scanning the room as if constantly on guard. Liam noticed. "Aren't you going to sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I can't. Not yet." "Do you think I'll hurt you?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the children, her lips trembling slightly. Liam, sensing her unease, walked over to the other side of the room and placed his worn hat on the hook before sitting down in his old wooden chair. "I'm not like the ones who hurt you," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." The girl stared at him, her expression still uncertain. "They all say that," she finally whispered. Liam nodded. "Then I'll show you." The hours passed in silence. Liam dozed off in his chair, the fire crackling quietly in the hearth. The alien girl, though, remained awake, watching the children as they slept peacefully. She saw the warmth of the fire and felt a slow sense of relief. She realized that the man across the room had not moved. He hadn't asked for anything. Slowly, for the first time in ages, she closed her eyes, letting sleep finally claim her. As the first light of dawn filtered through the small window, Liam stood outside, taking his time feeding the chickens. His motions were slow and deliberate, but his thoughts lingered on the alien woman and her children. She had arrived out of nowhere, desperate, proud, and silent. He knew that look. It was a look of someone who had lost everything, but still clung to whatever dignity they could hold on to. When he re-entered the house, he found the girl near the stove. She had cleaned the floor, folded the blankets, and washed the bowls. She stood waiting, not asking, just waiting. "I told you to rest," Liam said. "I'm not tired," she replied. "I said I would work." "You weren't kidding," he muttered under his breath. He pulled out some flour, oil, and dried herbs from a cupboard. "Ever made flatbread?" he asked. The girl hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but I can learn." "Good." Liam said, his voice warm. Let's make breakfast. She watched him closely, learning how he kneaded the dough, shaped it, and cooked it on a warm pan. After a few tries, she managed to make something that could pass for flatbread, though it wasn't perfect. Liam didn't mock her. He just nodded. Not bad. The smell of the bread reached the children, and they slowly woke up, their noses twitching at the scent. They looked at the girl, waiting for her approval. She smiled and nodded, and they eagerly ate, savoring each bite. This time, they ate slowly, thoughtfully, no longer like starving creatures. Liam placed a hand on the table. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl paused before responding. "My people call me Zira, but it's hard for humans to pronounce." Liam shrugged. "I'll try. I'm not afraid of your name, and I won't change it just to make it easier for me." Zira looked at him, her expression softening. It was the first time she saw him as someone who wasn't a threat. Maybe, just maybe, he could be trusted. After breakfast, Zira stood and asked, "What can I do today?" Liam nodded toward the back of the house. "You can help me clean out the tool shed." She followed him outside without another word. She worked silently, her sleeves rolled up, her hands swift and capable. Despite the splinters and the dust that filled the air, she didn't complain. She simply worked. Liam watched her closely, not because he doubted her, but because he saw something in her, a quiet strength, a fire that refused to be extinguished. At noon, he handed her a cup of water. She drank it quickly, then handed it back with a small bow. "You don't have to bow," Liam said, slightly puzzled. "It's a sign of respect," she answered. "Where I come from, we bow to those who didn't hurt us." Liam frowned. Sounds like a place where kindness was scarce. She didn't respond, but by the time the sun began to set, the shed was clean and the children had played quietly outside with sticks and stones. Zira kept a watchful eye on them, never letting them wander too far. That evening, Liam made a simple stew from dried meat and old vegetables. It wasn't much, but to Zira and her children, it felt like a feast. After the children had fallen asleep, Zira stood by the door, gazing at the stars. Liam joined her on the porch, sitting in the quiet of the evening. "You don't say much," he remarked. "I spoke too much before," she replied softly, "and it got me hurt." Liam didn't push her. He simply nodded, understanding. After a moment, Zira looked at him and asked, "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired of seeing good people broken." Zira looked at Liam, really looked at him for the first time. "I don't have anything to offer," she said softly, "except work." Liam turned to face her, his voice gentle. "You offered your word and you kept it. That's more than most people do." She glanced at the cabin behind her, then up at the sky, before her eyes returned to Liam. For the first time since she had arrived, she smiled, a small, fragile thing, but it was genuine. That night, the sky darkened early. Thick clouds rolled in, blocking the stars. The wind whispered across the fields, rustling the tall grass as though searching for secrets. Inside the farmhouse, the fire crackled, casting a warm glow in the room. The two children slept peacefully, curled together under the thick blanket. Zira stood by the window, her gaze distant. She hadn't said much all day. She had worked harder than usual, cooking, cleaning, even fixing one of the broken fence boards. She moved swiftly, mechanically, but Liam could sense something building in her, a tension that had been quietly simmering all day. "You don't rest," Liam said softly, "even when I tell you to." Zira didn't turn to face him. "I can't afford rest," she replied. "Why not?" he asked, concern in his voice. "You and the children are safe here." She stayed silent for a long moment, her hand gripping the window frame. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought that once before, and I was wrong." Liam said nothing. He simply waited, offering her the space to speak if she wished. At last, she turned to face him. Her eyes, once glowing with a faint light, now appeared heavy with exhaustion. "Do you want to know the truth?" she asked, her voice steady but tired. Liam nodded slowly. "Only if you want to tell it." Zira sat down across from him at the table, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she folded them in front of her. "I was born on a mining moon," she began. her voice calm, though the words held the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. There wasn't much light, no grass, just machines and buyers. My parents, they sold scrap. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I was 15, they sold me. Liam's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. Zira's gaze was fixed on her hands, and she continued without looking up. I worked in kitchens, factories, places where no one asked your name, just your body. Her voice didn't waver. She had told this story to herself 1,000 times, and each retelling made it colder, more distant. I escaped twice, she continued. Got caught both times. The third time, I ran far enough that they stopped looking for me. Her voice softened, and she inhaled deeply. I found the children. They were in a cage, starving, left behind. I took them. Liam asked gently, You didn't know them? Zira shook her head. No, but they looked like I did, so I didn't ask questions. I just took them. Liam's heart tightened as he gazed at her, taking in the weight of her words. You're not their mother, he said softly, but you became one. Zira's throat tightened and she swallowed hard. I didn't want them to feel the silence I felt when I was alone. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you'll disappear if no one says your name. The fire crackled softly beside them, the warmth and light providing a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. After a while, Liam leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. Do they ever thank you? Zira's lips curled into a faint, bittersweet smile. Children don't need to thank you. I see in the way they sleep how they don't wake up screaming. Liam nodded. That's how I knew they trusted you. They sleep like they belong. Zira looked at him, her eyes softening. Do you think someone like me deserves to belong? Liam didn't blink. I think someone like you earned it. Zira's breath caught, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, belief. She hadn't expected kindness, and she certainly hadn't expected to be seen. A log shifted in the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Zira stood, walking over to poke the flames with a stick, as though she needed something to focus on. People think aliens don't feel the way humans do, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over crackling fire. They're wrong. Liam, still sitting by the table, didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at her. I don't think you're less than human, he said softly. I think you're more than most. Tears filled Zira's eyes, though none fell. She had trained herself too long to keep them at bay, but one escaped anyway. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. I've lived like a shadow for so long, she whispered. Sometimes I forget I'm still real. Liam stood up and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not a shadow here, Zira. You're seen. Later that night, Zira lay down next to the children, holding them both tightly in her arms. She wrapped herself around them not because they were in danger, but because she remembered what it felt like to be alone in the dark. This time, she wouldn't let that happen to them, or to herself. Not again. 3 days passed, and the routine fell into place. It almost felt like a real family. Zira cooked, cleaned, and worked in the fields. The children played with sticks and helped gather eggs. Liam smiled more than he had in years. But peace doesn't last long in small towns, not when people start talking. It all began when Liam went into the nearby village for supplies. He walked in the general store, just as he always did. But this time, the room grew quiet the moment he entered. 2 men stood near the counter, whispering. One of them turned and stared at him. You've got someone living on your land, the man said. Liam didn't respond. A woman, the other man added. Not human. Liam placed a sack of grain on the counter. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice calm. The storekeeper sighed. People are worried, Liam. She doesn't belong here. Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. She's not hurting anyone. She's an alien, the first man snapped. How long before she steals something or brings more of them? Liam's gaze hardened. She's not hiding. I invited her here. Protecting one of them, huh? The man spat on the ground. After all they've done, they nearly destroyed this colony 10 years ago. She wasn't part of that, Liam said firmly. It doesn't matter, the man sneered. She's one of them. Liam stood tall, his voice colder now. She's raising children. She's working harder than anyone here. She saved 2 lives, and that counts for something. The man shook his head. You're making a mistake. Liam's eyes narrowed. No, he said, his voice low and firm. You are. If you come back here to threaten her again, I'll make sure you don't come back at all. The men glared at him but didn't respond. They turned and left. Zira had been watching from inside the cabin, holding her breath as the confrontation unfolded. That night, Liam found her sitting on the porch, cradling the smallest child in her arms. I'm sorry, she whispered. Liam sat beside her. For what? For bringing you trouble. He looked at her with a small smile. I lived alone before you came, he said softly. Not peaceful, just empty. You didn't bring trouble. You brought life. Zira gazed up at the stars, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. Zira looked at Liam, her gaze steady but somber. I was taught to keep my head down, she began, her voice quiet. To never speak unless spoken to accept shame instead of fighting it. Liam turned to face her, his expression soft but thoughtful. What do you want to teach them? He asked, nodding toward the children who were playing quietly by the fire. Zira was silent for a moment, her eyes distant before she replied. That they can raise their heads, that they have worth, that they can grow where they were once left to wither. Liam smiled, his voice firm and resolute. Then stay, and do that right here. The next day, a rock crashed through the farmhouse window, sending shards of glass flying. The children screamed in terror, and Zira immediately pulled them close, shielding them with her body. Liam rushed outside, but there was no sign of the culprit, just footprints left in the dirt. He returned quietly and began fixing the window, his motions calm but deliberate. Zira stood in the doorway, watching him. Do you still want us here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam didn't hesitate. Yes, he said firmly, but now they'll never stop. Zira's eyes darkened, but Liam placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then we won't stop either. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Zira found herself outside again. The air had grown cooler, and the sky was clear. Liam joined her, standing beside her in silence for a moment. You're not afraid? She asked, her voice soft, the question almost tentative. Liam nodded. I've faced storms before, he said, his voice steady. You don't run from them. You stand your ground. Zira looked up at him, her expression softening. Even if it's for someone like me? Liam nodded again. Especially then. The sky began to darken before noon, and thick clouds rolled across the hills, swallowing up the sun. The wind picked up, sharp and biting, bending the trees and kicking up the dust. Liam stood on the porch, his eyes narrowed as he stared into the horizon. That's not just rain, he muttered. Zira walked up beside him, carrying one child on her hip, the other clinging to her leg. Storm, Liam said. Big one. The kind that floods fields and rips roofs off. He looked at his crops, dozens of rows ready to be harvested, his whole season's work. And if the storm hit hard, everything would be lost. Zira noticed the fear in his eyes and immediately turned to the children. Inside, she instructed, and without a word, the children obeyed, running inside. Liam picked up a shovel and started toward the field. I need to dig water channels, he said, his voice strained. Divert it before it soaks everything. Zira followed him, her voice urgent. You'll never finish in time. I have to try, he said, determination in his voice. The wind grew stronger, the first cold raindrops falling fast and heavy. Liam dug with urgency, but the earth was quickly turning to mud. His hand slipped, and his hat flew off, carried away by the wind. The rain felt like stones hitting him. Then Zira appeared beside him, grabbing another shovel. What are you doing? Liam shouted over the storm. I said I would work, she shouted back, her eyes fierce. Liam started to argue, but stopped when he saw the determination in her eyes. She didn't wait for permission. She just began digging. Together, they worked, carving deep channels along the edges of the field. Water began to run away from the roots instead of drowning them. Zira moved like fire, quick, steady, relentless. The rain soaked her hair and clothes, mud clung to her legs, and her arms bled where stones had cut her skin. But she didn't stop. Liam stumbled, his leg cramping, and she grabbed him, holding him up. "Don't fall now," she said through gritted teeth. "We're not done." By the time the storm passed, the sun was nearly gone, hidden behind the hills. The two of them stood, drenched and exhausted, their bodies covered in mud. But the field had survived. The wheat was bent but not broken. The earth was wet but not washed away. Zira dropped to her knees and let out a shaky laugh, one that was more exhaustion than joy. Liam sat beside her, too tired to speak, but a smile tugged at his lips. They returned to the house in silence. Inside, the children ran to Zira, hugging her wet legs, and Liam sat at the table, wiping his face with a towel. His hands ached and his back throbbed, but he smiled. "You saved the crops," he said. Zira shook her head. "We saved them." "No," Liam insisted, his voice firm. "You did." The next morning, the villagers arrived, not with anger, not with rocks, but with curiosity. People had watched from a distance as the alien girl had thrown herself into the storm to protect a field that wasn't even hers. Merrick, the old miller, stepped forward. "You lost less than the rest of us," he said, his voice measured. Liam nodded, "because she worked through the storm." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. They all knew who he was talking about. A woman, her voice quiet, whispered, "She saved this farm." Liam nodded again, his gaze steady. Zira stayed inside, peeking through the curtain, not yet trusting the change. Not yet. Later that day, a soft knock came at the door. Zira opened it to find a young boy standing there, holding a bundle. His mother stood behind him, a warm smile on her face. "These are dry clothes," the woman said. "We saw what you did. Thank you." Zira took the clothes with trembling hands, not speaking, just grateful. Another woman brought soup. An old man left tools on the porch. The same people who had once whispered now tried, slowly, to understand. That night, Zira sat by the fire, her legs wrapped in bandages, her hands still sore. Liam handed her a cup of tea. "You didn't have to do it," he said quietly. Zira looked at him, her voice soft. "I did this. The land gave me food, gave my children peace. It gave me you." Liam looked down at his cup, not speaking. Zira smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "It's the first place that didn't ask me to be less. So I gave it everything I had." Outside, the field stood tall in the moonlight. For the first time, the village saw her, not as a burden, but as one of their own. The rain had passed. The sky was clear again, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and growing crops. Liam's field, once feared to be lost, stood proudly, green, strong, and alive. It was the only one in the area that had survived the storm, not because of luck, but because of Zira. Zira sat on the porch, her hands wrapped in cloth, where the shovel had torn her skin. Her legs still ached, but she didn't complain. She watched her children chase each other in the grass, their laughter real now, not the quiet, fearful sound they once made. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were living. She turned her head as footsteps approached. Liam came up beside her, holding a wooden box. Inside were nails, a hammer, and sandpaper. "What's that for?" Zira asked, raising an eyebrow. Liam pointed toward the old fence. "I thought we'd build something new, together." Zira smiled. "Something that lasts?" Liam nodded. "Like you." As they began working, someone appeared at the gate. It was Merrick, the old miller, carrying a sack of flour on his back. Liam stepped forward, cautious, but Merrick raised his hand in peace. "This is a gift," Merrick said, setting the sack down, "for her and her children." Zira looked up from the fence, confused. "Why?" Merrick placed the sack slowly on the ground. "Because I was wrong. I said things, ugly things, but I saw what you did. No one else ran into that field. You did, for a man who didn't owe you anything." Zira looked down at the ground, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry." Liam stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He stepped forward, and, to Zira's surprise, bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing me." Later that day, others began to show up. A woman brought new shoes for the children. Another offered seeds and cloth for curtains. One of the men who had once thrown a rock through their window walked up, holding a wooden toy. He didn't speak a word, just placed the toy on the porch before turning and walking away. Zira's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sense of acceptance. That evening, as the sun began to set, Zira sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn a brilliant orange. Liam joined her, a warm cup of tea in his hands. "You were right," Zira said, her voice thoughtful, "about people noticing. Maybe not at first, but they remember kindness." Liam nodded. "And strength. You showed them both." Zira looked down at her hands, reflecting. "I used to think I had to prove myself, to be useful, to earn every breath." Liam looked at her, his voice sincere. "You've earned more than that. You've earned a place." The children came running up the steps, both holding small bundles of wildflowers. "For you, Mama," the younger one said, presenting the flowers with a beaming smile. Zira's breath caught in her throat as she took the flowers in her hands, her smile so wide it almost hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. The children ran off again, their laughter ringing in the air as they chased each other through the tall grass. Liam looked at Zira. "They're healing, too." She nodded, her eyes softening. "Because of here. Because of you." Liam looked out at the land, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You're a part of this now, Zira. This farm, this life. It's not just mine anymore." Zira turned to him, her voice soft. "It feels like the first time something fits." Liam smiled gently. "Then let's keep building." That night, Zira stood at the window, watching the moonlight spill across the field. Her children slept peacefully nearby. In her hands, she held the wooden toy that the man had left behind, the same man who had once hated her. It was carved carefully, a little alien girl holding a flower. Tears slid down her cheeks, but this time they didn't come from sadness. They came from belonging. The next day, the sun was warm, the earth smelled fresh, and birds sang in the trees. The children laughed as they picked wild berries near the fence. Zira stood in the field, her hands on her hips, watching the wheat sway in the breeze. It was a peaceful sight, one she never imagined she'd see. "This place no longer feels borrowed," Zira thought, as the breeze ran through her silver hair. "It feels like home." Liam walked up behind her, wiping sweat from his brow. "The soil's holding," he said with a smile. "We'll have a good harvest." Zira smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "We," she said, turning toward him. Liam nodded. "That's right. We." Zira looked at him. Her expression softened. "You say it like I've always belonged here." "You have," he replied, his voice steady. "The land just took a little time to agree." Zira laughed softly, a sound full of relief, joy, and freedom. Liam gave Zira land, asking her to stay, not out of need, but because she chose to. She said yes.